Chapter 28, page 216. A few minutes later, Monte Cristo arrived at 7 Rue Meslay, and the porter who opened the door of the courtyard. The Count recognized old Cocles, but Cocles did not recognize the Count. Baptistine leaned down from his seat to ask if Monsieur and Madame Herbault and Monsieur Maximilien Morrel were at home. To the Count of Monte Cristo. To the Count of Monte Cristo, cried Maximilien, throwing away his cigar and hurrying out to meet the visitor. Thank you very much, Count, for not forgetting your promise. And the young officer shook the Count's hand so warmly that there could be no doubt about his sincerity. Come with me, said Maximilien. I want to introduce you myself. A man like you shouldn't be announced by a servant. My sister is in the garden cutting off the dead roses, and her husband is reading the newspaper there. Wherever Madame Herbault is, you may be sure that Monsieur Herbault is within a radius of 4 yards, and reciprocally, as they say at the École Polytechnique. At the sound of their footsteps, a young woman of about 25, wearing a silken morning gown, raised her head. It was our little Julie, who had become, as the representative of Thomson and French had predicted, Madame Emmanuelle Herbault. She uttered a little cry on seeing a stranger. Maximilien began to laugh. It was treacherous of my brother to bring you here, sir, she said to the Count. He never considers his sister's vanity. Penelon, Penelon. The old man, digging in a bed of Bengal roses, stuck his spade into the ground and walked over, holding his cap in his hand and doing his best to hide a quid of tobacco by pushing it toward the back of his mouth. His brown face and his bold, keen eyes made it easy to recognize him as an old sailor, tanned by the tropical sun and weathered by countless gales. I believe you hailed me, Mademoiselle Julie, he said. Here I am. He had kept the habit of calling his employer's daughter Mademoiselle Julie, and had never been able to accustom himself to calling her Madame Herbault. Penelon, said Julie, go to Monsieur Emmanuel about this gentleman's visit. Then, turning to the Count, she said, will you allow me to leave you for a moment? Without waiting for a reply, she disappeared behind a clump of trees and slipped into the house by a side entrance. A short time later, Emmanuel appeared and greeted his visitor with great courtesy. Then, after having shown the Count around the garden, he led him into the house. The salon was impregnated with the scent of the flowers, which filled an enormous Japanese vase. Julie, now properly dressed and impeccably groomed, she had accomplished this feat in 10 minutes, was waiting to receive the Count. Birds could be heard chirping in a nearby aviary. Laburnum and acacia trees spread their leaves against the blue velvet curtains. Everything in this charming little retreat breathed serenity, from the songs of the birds to the smiles of its owners. The Count had been keenly aware of this air of happiness from the moment he entered. He stood silent and thoughtful, forgetting that the others were waiting for him to continue the conversation after the first exchange of greetings. He finally became conscious of this almost embarrassing silence and made an effort to pull himself out of his reverie. Madame, he said, forgive me for an emotion which must be surprising to you, accustomed as you are to the peace and happiness I find here. But for me it's such a rare experience to see satisfaction in a human face that it's hard for me to take my eyes off you and your husband. It's true that we're happy, replied Julie, but we had to suffer for a long time, and a few people have paid as high a price for their happiness as we have. The Count's face took on an expression of curiosity. And did God send you consolation for your suffering, as he does to everyone? He asked. Yes, Count, said Julie. We can truly say that he did, for he did for us what he does only for his elect. He sent us one of his angels." The Count's cheeks turned red, and he coughed in order to be able to hide his emotion by putting his handkerchief before his face. Then he began to pace around the room. "Our magnificence must make you smile, Count," said Maximilian. "No, not at all," replied Monte Cristo. He pointed to a hollow crystal globe, inside which a silk purse carefully placed on a black velvet cushion. "I was just wondering about this purse, with a piece of paper in one compartment and a rather handsome diamond in the other," he said. "That's the most precious of all of our family treasures, Count," said Maximilian gravely. "The objects inside that purse are relics of an angel I mentioned just now." "Count," said Maximilian, lifting the crystal globe and reverently kissing the silk purse, "this once touched the hand of a man who saved my father from death, us from ruin, and our name from dishonor. This letter was written by him on a day when my father had made an extremely desperate resolution, and the same unknown benefactor gave this diamond to my sister for her dowry." Monte Cristo opened the letter and read it with an indescribable happiness. It was the letter addressed to Julie and signed Sinbad the Sailor. "Did you say unknown?" asked the Count. "Has the man who rendered you this service always remained unknown to you?" "Yes, we've never had the joy of shaking his hand," replied Maximilian, "although it's certainly not because we haven't begged God to grant us that favor. He was an Englishman who presented himself to my father as a representative of the firm of Thomson and French of Rome. That's why you saw me start the other day when you mentioned that Thomson and French were your bankers. It happened in 1829. Tell me, in the name of God, did you know that man?" "Let's see," said Monte Cristo. "Was he a man about my size, slightly taller and thinner, perhaps, who always wore a high collar and always had a pencil in his hand?" "Oh, then you know him!" cried Julie, her eyes sparkling with joy. "No, I'm only guessing. I once knew a Lord Wilmore who used to perform generous actions like that without revealing his identity. He was a strange man who didn't believe in the existence of true gratitude. Since then, however, he may have had proof that he was mistaken." "Oh, if you know him, take us to him," cried Julie. "If we could only see him, he'd have to believe in our gratitude." "Alas," said Monte Cristo, trying to stifle the emotion in which his voice "if Lord Wilmore was your benefactor, I'm afraid you'll never find him. When I left him 2 or 3 years ago in Palermo, he was preparing to leave for all sorts of faraway countries, and I doubt that he'll ever return. Besides, you shouldn't build any hopes on my remarks. Lord Wilmore is probably not the man you're searching for. He and I were close friends. I knew all of his secrets, but he never said a word about this matter." "Yet you thought of him immediately," said Julie. "I was only guessing." "Besides, Julie," said Maximilian, coming to the Count's aid, "don't forget what our father said to us so often. It wasn't an Englishman who gave us our happiness." Monte Cristo started. "Your father said," he began. "Yes, Count," said Maximilian. "My father saw a miracle in that action. He believed in a benefactor who had come back from the tomb to help us. It was a touching superstition, and while I didn't believe in it myself, I had no wish to destroy my father's belief in it. And when he was about to die, that thought became a conviction. His last words were, 'Maximilian, it was Edmond Dantes.'" The Count's pallor became almost frightening. All his blood rushed to his heart, and he was unable to speak for a moment. He looked at his watch as though he had forgotten the hour, took his hat, paid his compliments to Madame Herbault in an abrupt and embarrassed manner, shook hands with Emmanuel and Maximilian, and said, "Allow me to repeat my visit another day. I like your house, and I am grateful to you for your reception, for this is the first time I've forgotten myself in many years." He then strode swiftly out of the room. He's a strange man, the Count of Monte Cristo, said Emmanuel. Yes, said Maximilian, but I believe he has a good heart, and I'm sure he likes us. As for me, said Julie, his voice went straight to my heart, and 2 or 3 times it seemed to me that it wasn't the first time I had heard it.